It just happened at this point that they were working on Rio, their first Rio movie. They were very interested in birds. Coins or whatever. That was really funny. So I was, they called me, they made an interview, and I'm telling you, I was nervous for this first interview with my internship in LA, but oh my God, was I nervous for the Blue Sky Studios call. I was so nervous because I wanted it so bad that I was like, don't screw it up, don't screw it up.
My guest today is Sabine Heller. She is currently the global head of character animation and rigging at Micros Animation and worked incredible 12 years in the rigging department at Blue Sky Studios until its recent closure. Together, we talk about her rigging career from a junior to the head of characters, her experiences at Blue Sky Studios, the feature animation films she worked on, and the final days of a legendary studio in 2021. You are listening to the 21 Artist Show, a podcast that inspires creatives to make meaningful content to pursue their passions. I'm talking with creators, artists, and engineers about their careers, lessons they have learned, and how to make an impact. I'm your host, Alexander Richter. I'm a technical director and coach in visual effects, animation, and games. For more content, go to 21artistshow.com. Enjoy the show. It's awesome to have you on the show, Sabine.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited.
One of the things that we always want to do at the show in the beginning is to give a little bit of an overview over your career, because it's always kind of like, okay, who is this person we're talking about? What are kind of the milestones of the life? So can you give us a little bit of a brief history of your career? Like, what did you do and where did you go?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I'll start with, I grew up in Germany, so that's where I was born and spent most of my life there. And then later on, I became super interested in animation, and I decided that's what, I want to do for my career. And I then started working at a small company in Germany, in Hamburg, Spans & Partner. And after that, I moved to New York to start at Blue Sky Studios. And there I spent 12 years, until recently, actually. I was started there as a character technical director in the rigging department. And then I moved to different positions. I became a lead. I became a character development supervisor. And at the end, I was head of characters. And after that, just this year, basically, Blue Sky Studios was closed, unfortunately. And now I'm actually the global head of character animation and rigging at Micros Animation, which is owned by Technicolor.
Perfect. That's an awesome career. 12 years is a lifetime in this industry. So it's basically like, for me, it's basically unheard of. A lot of people, there are like companies like Pixar or Weta who maintain this like long streak of people who stay there for that long of time. But 12 years is a lot. And that's one of the things I was so fascinated about, is kind of like how did you kind of maintain this interest in a company and maintain this kind of a career in being 12 years at a company. It's super interesting. But we actually, like, how we actually met was actually at the Film Academy. That's where I met you first time, and then later at the FMX. So you were
right.
doing a course in rigging. And to the audience, I'm not a rigger at all, so I don't really have any clue about rigging. I did my rigging basics in the beginning, as everyone did, but I have no clue. But I remember one sentence that you said in the course. You were kind of like very blend shapes. That was something that you loved, and you were kind of more of creating sustainable rigs instead of creating too complicated code bases kind of thing. That's something I kind of remember a little bit from you were very much this kind of fundamentals.
It's interesting. I think it always varies a little bit. I at Blue Sky, we in the rigging department, we did both. We did the more technical base of it, and then we also did the blend shapes or let's put it like this, the more creative aspects of it. Some studios, they separate this out, and the rigging artists, they don't do any of that, and they do more of the technical aspects of it. But we did both, and one of the things is I noticed is that, at least where, I came from a Blue Sky, the creative aspect of it was always something that needed to be, we needed to train people. So for example, when you were hiring people, a lot of the students that wanted to become riggers were very focused on the technical aspects. But then sometimes the deformations, how do deformations look? And that also includes skinning, not only correctives, but how does it look artistically? That was sometimes a little bit in the background, it was secondary. So that's why when I came to the Film Academy, I wanted to definitely make sure that I communicated, what we are looking for is also that it's, you have a technical foundation and the technical aspects are awesome. But not only that, it's also, you have to make sure that it looks good in the result. So there is a really artistic aspect to it, which sometimes, when you say, oh, rigging, and it's often called rigging TD, right? Technical director. So that there is a creative aspect to it. And sometimes that's actually quite large aspect. And sometimes that's can become a really, really important one. I think in every rig, it is important. And it's also important for the animator you work with, because they want to have beautiful deformations at the end. So that's why when I had that little workshop, I was really wanted to communicate that this is actually one of the main things that we're currently waiting for to see also on demo reels when people apply, when students apply, because it is not only the really technical aspects. For me, rigging also includes the deformation and having, a beautiful outcome at the end that looks the way you would want to have it for your character.
Yeah, no, but it kind of stuck to my mind. I remember this specific point, so you successfully put it definitely in my brain, inceptioned it. So no, but I feel like a lot of other people know you mostly from FMX, for example. You did multiple talks there. I remember the Peanuts talk, but also from documentaries and making offs. Actually, you sent me, for example, some of I saw before, some were new, and I was like, wow, she is super famous here. Just kind of an interesting thing for like, how did it end up that you were coming in so many making offs? Like
that's a really interesting question, because when I started at Blue Sky, it was, I think, that started on Rio 1 maybe, or on Epic. I'm not sure anymore. But one of the interesting thing was that at the beginning, I realized, and I think that was just how it was, most of the people that were interviewed for the making offs were actually animators. And there were a lot of animators on it, and that, there are probably a lot of marketing reasons for that. Animators can be sometimes very animated. They talk about performance. It's just a little bit more, yeah, exactly. They're very animated. And sometimes it's also about, I think it's easier to understand for the audience that watches it what actually animation is. I think not that I would say, if yes, especially 3D animation, sometimes people still think a little bit more about, do you draw, right? Are you drawing everything? I think that's still questions that I sometimes get. But I still think, compared to rigging that nobody knows from a general audience, animation is much easier to explain. So at that point in time, there was still a lot of, it was primarily animators, then you had directors, of course, you had the art department, a lot of them, those people were interviewed for that. And it is funny, because I would say that the turning point came a little bit, and that was, I don't know, must have been really relatively early, a couple of years after I started. An animator was out, I believe it was out that day when the interviews were done, I think out sick. And one of the other animators I had worked with said, hey, why don't you ask Sabine? She has worked with me, you know, we worked on this together. Why can we maybe interview her, you know, and just then she can, you know, substitute for that. So that's basically how I got into this. And then I just spoke about things and tried to make it relatively simplified. And I think that was kind of the point where then from there on, I was in every single one of those.
You were shortlisted basically. Is like, okay, we need someone with a little bit more technical. So what we have on the list, top of the list, Sabine. Okay.
Yeah, I think it was partly that. And then I also think it was, it became a little bit more of something, you know. I remember there was this cool, I think it was, you know, like a cool making of where they were explaining also what different aspects going into making 3D animation. And I think that was also from I think one was from, I don't know, I think it was on Despicable Me. That was a really cool one. There was a couple of those that started, and Blue Sky also started to, you know, pull in more, you know, different aspects of it. And I think so that became a really good thing. And I think it actually made a lot of sense because it increased the visibility of all the different pipeline steps. It increased the visibility of artists behind the scenes, you know, that have different roles. And I think it also helped a little bit with you know, inspire people that want to go into the industry to see other roles in there and understand a little bit what really goes into making it. And of course that helped marketing as well. And that's kind of how it turned out. It's funny because I think the main interview I always get asked about is the Rio 2 interview with Blue and Jewel, where I show like, and it was a long interview, and it was pretty fun. And it's funny, still until this day, people talk to me about it when I meet people, or even if I, you know, now in my new role, interview people for a job. They say, oh yeah, Sabine, I've been, you know, seeing this interview and I've been looking at how to do birds. And it's really funny that this took off that way. And I had no idea. You know, you don't know. It's just when people talk to you about it, then it becomes like, oh really, you watched that?
Yeah, I mean, you this kind of things you do and forget, basically. You know, it's kind of like takes some hours, maybe you do it, and then you go back to work, and it's not like your focus of your life or something. And then sometimes even years later, people suddenly come to you as like, oh, I saw this thing that you did like in 5 minutes, saw that, and that's why I know you. And it's like, ooh.
Yes. And it's funny because I honestly always enjoyed that aspect of it because it's you know, it's something different that you do, right? It's you do your day, you know, normal job, your day job, but this is something a little different. So I always loved it because it, you know, brings a little bit of a change to your normal work day, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. So also one of the reasons why I started the YouTube channel, podcast and stuff, is kind of like you can like look at things in a different way. You talk about in a different way. It's also fun to talk to you, for example, about specific topics, like, you know, and dive into that you in a way do at work. You know, you talk about careers and stuff like that, but here you can like focus really on specific things or just kind of like see what will come out of it, basically.
Yes.
So really, really nice. So so that was something I noticed for you. You're definitely one of the more famous people here on the show. So yeah, I will definitely blend in the videos so people will know, even more people will know your making ofs here.
Yeah, but one thing and I'm not sure if you're gonna use that one, but there is this one thing that was the craziest thing I'd ever done, and that was for the Peanuts movie, where it was literally a one-off thing for Nickelodeon, and it was a kids thing, and it was kind of acted out, and it was just crazy. I think that was the weirdest thing I've ever done. But it was fun, you know, it was definitely different.
Now, dear audience, we don't have any choice but to blend it in. So if you want to watch it, go over to YouTube to watch this clip which described this now. So, okay, that was fantastic. So I think we go a little bit back and go a little bit at the time where you actually started in itself. So before you came to Blue Sky, there were of course a life before that. So the question is basically like, how did you end up being at Blue Sky? What were the steps that you took to end up at Blue Sky?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said before, I grew up in Germany, and at that point in time, I didn't really, when I came out of school, I didn't really think about that I could have a career in animation, at least at the very beginning. But what I did know is I wanted to do something with art and design. And I wanted to do something that has to do with computers and technical, because I really loved, just working with the computer. I would be maybe a little bit far-fetched to say that I was a gamer, but I did definitely play games, and I, just started, just using the computer. I used, kind of like, I think it actually was still Corel Draw at that point, really early on, just to like, to just start and try things out. And it was just something where I was like, and keep in mind, I was like, 1999 maybe. So that's where I'm kind of dating myself a little bit, right?
That's important, by the way, to give a little bit of perspective, yes. because I just made an episode with Carl Rosendale, PDI, and he founded the company in 1980. So I always need to kind of remind people, like, please give us a context of the time, because the internet and all this stuff was a lot of times not as prevalent as today. So
so I guess that was around that time, 1999, and then I graduated from high school in Germany, the equivalent in 2000, and started actually at Hochschule Darmstadt. At that point, it was the Fachhochschule Darmstadt, and it was an interesting new program that was cool because I loved the combination of different things. It had like an aspect of design, graphic design, and it had an aspect of programming and information technology. And then it also, in addition of it, it has a project management aspect. So it was a little bit more in, that realm. It was a little bit more, the internet, you web design, those kind of things. And I was really drawn to that. And I loved that. And I started there and, was introduced to a lot of different aspects. And I really responded well to the, just programming. I really liked scripting. I loved the graphic design aspect. And I also, at that point in time, I was interested in the project management aspect, but I didn't see this as like the one thing I want to really go into, which is funny because that changed during my career, and we will get back to
20
that.
20 years later, kind of.
Yes. So, and it was really, I really loved it. It was a great program. And as I said, it was really new. So a lot of things were still kind of being figured out. But I thought I got a really good overview and introduction on a lot of things. And but what I realized too, in the very first, I think it was the very first summer after my first, I think 2 semesters. And I was like, okay, I want to go to IBM and do an internship for the summer. And I did. And I wanted to just see, is the really programming, is that what I want? It was interesting. I definitely had a lot of fun. It was really something I enjoyed, but I also realized that what I was making and programming, I didn't really have a visual output. I think it took a while until I realized what I was actually doing or what I was actually programming for. And it was for car manufacturing. I think they were doing for really fancy cars, some of the roof stuff, and I was working on the system. And it was, at some point I got to visit the manufacturing company, but it was still very abstract. And that was the thing where I was like, okay, I think that doesn't quite work for me. I need the visual. I need that aspect. If I just, see code, and that's pretty much the main thing I do, and I don't really know what it's going to do in the grand scheme, I think that is really hard for me. So after that, and just so you know, on the side, I was a huge fan of animation, and there were a lot of things that I probably really kind of bugged my friends at college because I watched those short films that were coming out at those times. I think I like For the Birds from Pixar. I've watched so many times and could still laugh after like the 20th times. And I loved, Shrek. I watched Shrek so many times. And I was just like, at some point it was just dawning on me, like, I should do that because I just love watching it. And I love the technical aspects. I love the art aspects, but better than 3D animation. And that's literally where I was deciding. And that was, I think, after the first 2 semesters, I was like, this is what I want to do. And the great thing is actually at my university was very open to some of this. Although, in my studies, there was no 3D aspect to it. One of my professors, for example, actually came a little bit more from that area very early, right? This is very early. And in Germany at that point, there were not that many schools, except, you had the Film Academy, but it was just not as common as it is today. And also getting the software, right, was a different story. There were no student versions. So what I did is I decided I'm going to apply for this side job at the Research Institute, the Fraunhofer Institute. At that point, I think it was the ZGTV, which is a Center for Graphic Imagery, I think I would translate that as. And it was cool because they basically, and I just always loved this, they paid me for learning Maya, or like really early, on an SGI workstation. And of course, you couldn't buy that at that point in time. That was definitely, especially for a student, I was, definitely wasn't that wealthy to be able to get that. So it was fantastic. And I literally got paid for that, learning it. I went through the whole handbook of it. That was also the time there were not that many tutorials. There were actually not really any tutorials online. So I was just going through it, and I was just doing this and creating some avatars, I think, for that research institute. And it was amazing that I actually had that job that paid me and I could learn it. And so that was really awesome. And then I, of course, did so much 3D at home, but that was more of like a 3D Studio Max and some other, where I could buy books, yes, physical books for tutorials, and, try to learn it. And then, and that was the really cool thing, is my university in that program, there was 1 semester, 1.5 year that you mandatory had to do an internship. And it was for you to, get work experience, but also to, see how you like certain areas. And that was kind of something I was like, okay, I want to do 3D. I want to do this, where do I go? And of course, and I had no connection whatsoever, but I was like, oh, where can you do this best? You go to LA, right? That's where this stuff is done. Los Angeles, Hollywood. And I was like, okay, now let's apply there. I had no idea what companies were out there. I didn't know how that would work with, hiring me. So what I did, and, one thing you have to know about me, I'm very much about, okay, I'll do my research, and I figured this out by like getting books and reading about it. So at that point, they had this book that basically was like an industry book, and it gave you like an overview over what kind of, and it really was just a directory pretty much. So I got this, it was an American book, I ordered that, and then I got it, and I went through every single company in this book that was in Los Angeles. And I looked at their website if they had one. Some of them didn't. That was still
awesome. It was still the very early times.
Yes, it was very early. And then I decided, what can I do good? One of the things, okay, I just started with 3D, so I was a little bit more of an art, it was more autodidactic. I did this kind of on my own, and of course learning at the Research Institute, but I was also on my own pretty much. So what can I do good? Well, I can do websites pretty good because that's what I learned in my studies. So I made a website and I put some work examples on it. Oh, were they bad? But they were early, were 3D in a time where people didn't do that so much yet. And then I sent, I knew, since I had no connections, I basically decided I'm going to send out email applications because, we are, regular mail that would have been probably too expensive. So I decided to send that out, give them a link to my website, and then apply. And as I said, this was not that common. Today, it's that's what you do. You send a link to your reel online. At that point, that was a little different, and I wasn't sure if it would work. So I sent it out, and I sent literally, I think I must have sent 100 emails to 100 companies. And you know what? I had one really interested company. I couldn't believe it. They called me on my phone, which had an answering machine. No, that was not a cell phone. That was a regular phone.
We're going back in time, and I'm slowly feeling like we're Back to the Future 3 here, and then we're basically, you just said like, okay, by the way I came to the US was by like a horse and ship and stuff like that. That's what I'm waiting for here.
It's so funny, and it's really not that bad. It's just also you have to think about it. And I did have a cell phone, but one of the things is that money was always a thing as well, right? When you're a student, and you also had to look it out for that. So I, had the answering machine on my regular phone. And one day I had this message from Gentle Giant Studios, and it was the company owner that called. And I was beyond excited and terrified. And so I made this interview with him, and so we talked, and I had my whole desk was full of paper that I had written on things like, if I don't know or I don't understand them, because, English wasn't my, first language, right? German was my first language. I had English in school, but actually before English, I had learned French. So at that point, I would say, French was, after my native language, the second language I learned, because French I had first. So I was nervous. And I had all of those sentences. If I don't understand him, then I'm going to read this. And it was really funny, and it worked out. But what was the difficult thing is that he said, the only, they don't pay for internships. I think this is still very common, right? So you have to get your own finance. I'm not coming from a poor family, but we were definitely not in a wealthy family, so it was something that was definitely something to consider. So what I decided at that point in time, they had a scholarship that I could apply for, and it was for internships. And they, though, said I would only get it if I had secured my job. And my company in Gentle Giant Studios, they said, I can only give you the job if you have your finances secured. So I, did a little bit of oh yeah, got that. I sent an email that wasn't 100% the confirmation, but so it worked. You had to balance this a little bit, and at the end it worked. And so I got financing from the scholarship, but of course, thanks to my family, I also got a little bit of support there. But it wasn't like I definitely it just helped to kind of balance that out a little bit. And and that's what I did. And I went to LA, had, I think it scared a little bit my parents, because I basically flew out there, had no housing, no car, no whatsoever, not knowing where this company really was, and except from what I've seen online. So, but it worked out. I got a lot of really great help from some people in LA, and I was able to have a really, really good time there. Got to know the business. This was, as I said, early, and 2002, I flew over there, I believe. And what was interesting is they were doing 3D scanning for maquettes sometimes. So we sometimes would get Pixar maquettes that we would scan in, which was of course awesome, right? But then we would also have like the maquettes from Lord of the Rings. I remember I had this early maquette that I scanned from the Balrog, which was that big kind of demon monster. And it was just amazing, awesome. And then the main thing was, and that was really interesting, because they did toys, and they scanned actors for
the figures.
It's for figures, but also for effects, because they were one of the few companies that had a full body scanner. Also, as I said, 2002, different story today, but at that point they had a full body scanner and they had a head scanner, and they were actually mobile. They had it on a truck. And you could go to the set. You would take this truck and go on set, a huge truck. In the back, you had a full body scanner, where an actor could stand in. And in the front, you had like a seat. And then you would have a scan that would go around your head. And one day, I got the opportunity to go on set. So my supervisor went to on set with me for I think that was the film Haunted Mansion, and so I found out then that we're gonna scan Eddie Murphy, which was pretty exciting for me.
For us at that time, he was like amazing. You watched all these movies at that time. Jackie Chan, all these kind of stars were really big for us at that like kind of 90s, 2000s.
Yes, Eddie Murphy was like, I was like, I can't believe it. But what was the funniest thing about it is that I think, we went on set and I got to know the effects company. I think it actually was ILM at that point. And I spoke with people and they were all everybody was a little tense. And it was interesting because, it was kind of the thing where, they said, Eddie Murphy's actually really shy. And I'm like, oh, really? Okay. Because I did really, you don't, he's an actor, an excellent actor.
He's a stand-up comedian also.
Yeah, stand-up comedian. So I was like, okay. And then he's like, okay, so, really, it's possible, that, he's really shy and we'll have to be really, make sure that this all works well. And I was like, oh, wow. So there's those three grown men that are absolutely a little terrified that this is all going well. And I was just thinking like, okay. And I'm just like 21 or so, right? And this is my first time here. I was like, oh man, I'm not sure. This is going to be interesting. So, and then he came into the truck because it's really tight in that truck too. So yeah, you have to imagine this. You have those 3 or 2 ILM guys sitting in the corner in the back. Then I'm sitting on the computer and right in front of me or behind me, because you're kind of turning to work on your machine, and you have to seat where you do the head scan. And my supervisor says, "Oh, Sabina, you do the head scan, and I'm gonna prep the body scan." And I was just, "Oh my God, now I have to do this on my own." And so Eddie Murphy came in, and I said, "Oh yeah, please sit down. Nice to meet you." And he did not say a word. Not one word. And I was like, oh man. And I'm so nervous. And then he sat down and I explained to him, what to do. And you have to, hold really still. I do your first scan and then I'm going to see how it goes and make just some adjustments. And then we'll see. And then we'll do some facial expressions, whatever actually, the ILM team would like you to do, but primarily we do this, and that. And so I did this first scan. Again, Eddie Murphy didn't say a word. And I turn around, I'm basically sitting there and I'm turning around, checking out the scan. And I feel like behind me, and as I say, this is really tight. So Eddie Murphy leans over and I can feel it. And I'm just like, oh, and then so I'm turning around and he's like, this is awesome. This is so cool. And I was like, whoo. And you could like literally in this truck, it started like to change this atmosphere. I think I've never felt this as much as in this moment, because I guess it's also because I was super nervous. And it just like turned into, people are excited, and I was like, this was so good. And then, we did all the scans, and I just have to say, I think I've never seen anybody be as controlled as he is with, that was amazing. I mean, he could hold so still, and it took a while until this thing goes around. There was like, it was the most perfect scan because he did not make any sort of movement, and it was a really extreme expressions, and it was absolutely amazing to see that control. And what was really cool is, then he went on and he did his body scan, which, everybody was really happy in the truck. And I was prepping everything in the back. And at the end of this, it was really cool. Actually, Eddie Murphy came back to the end of the track and personally, say, hey, thank you so much. This was an awesome experience. And I was like, oh, okay, that's it. I'm so loving it.
Can I have your number? That's nice. Wow. This is like, because that's something that actually doesn't happen that often. People were asking me like, oh, you worked on Avatar 2. How did you meet James Cameron? It's like, that's not happening normally.
Yes.
Or you work on Star Wars. Did you meet George Lucas or whoever is currently in charge? Like, that's not happening normally. Yeah. Or the actors or someone like that. So it's kind of an interesting experience that you actually had that in the beginning of your career to have someone A-listed.
It was definitely something where I was like, okay, this was, it was nerve-wracking and pretty awesome. And especially awesome since it turned out so, well in the end. And I also didn't make a big mistake, that would render everything unusable. So no, it was pretty exciting. I think that was one of my biggest highlights. And I really enjoyed it there. And actually, they did ask if I would stay at the company, but I guess that's maybe just me, but I was like, nope, education first has to be finished.
We're Germans, by the way. That's why for us it's like no, we don't go this weird rock star road. We're going the education road first.
That's right.
That's rich. I feel like this is kind of a cultural thing also coming from that.
It is a little bit. I also think it's it's very interesting because I've seen so many people with different careers over the years, and everybody has a different background, and some people don't they didn't go to school for it, and it worked amazingly for them. And my personal way was always, I like to go, I want to study it. I don't, I feel like, okay, I have a confirmation that, that I have a degree, and it's funny because in some ways for me personally, it has worked out because one thing, since I, initially didn't have a green card or any sort of like, citizenship of the US, if you have a degree, it is slightly, or you have more ways to get a visa to go to the US. And that's where it paid off for me actually quite a lot because of that. There are different categories in this area, and I didn't know this at that time, but now that I notice that's the thing. If you're somewhere, in a different country and you would want to come and work in the US or probably in in a lot of other countries, it might be the same, but I'm not familiar with that. But for the US, I know that there are different categories. And if you have degrees and you have education, then you qualify for different visas. And that, in that sense, it paid off for me, because I think otherwise it would have been very difficult maybe for me to come over, or get my green card, or, you know, now having US citizenship, although that was, you know, then easier once you had your green card.
Basically, that's what education does. It creates opportunities like everything else. It's not like you can, especially in this industry, you don't have to have education. You can just, like, through pure brute force and skill, can go through their career and, of course, create relationship, which is super important. But education, what I noticed, and I think probably you noticed the same, is you advance higher most of the time, because you have this understanding background. You know, if you not just learn scripting by practice, but really have a scripting background, or if you learned, like, for example, rigging, not just rigging, but real autonomy, biological anatomy or something like that. I feel like there is always this edge which goes to a specific level, and then you get to this glass ceiling. And I feel like there's a lot of times this glass ceiling is education, where if you want to have a higher, over seniors a lot of times job, it feels like education is the one that a lot of times tips over and gives you the edge to that.
I have seen that as well, although I wouldn't say it is. It has to be that way. I have seen people that literally, like, they just have so much work experience and have done so many things that they advanced.
Sure.
And I do think that is. It's just, as you said, it opens up opportunities, and it depends, you know, what kind of path you want to take. And so for me, and that's also, as you said, you know, maybe cultural, maybe my personality, that I did definitely, I really like the educational way in some ways, which we might get later to in this conversation as well.
At least for me, I had always this feeling like, I should have learned that. Feeling you have to sometimes too. For example, I remember in physics, for example, I always hated physics. I love math, but I like school math at least, but I hated physics. But now when I'm coming more into 3D and rendering and all this jazz, it's suddenly like, oh, physics would be actually very practical, but I never got the hang of it, and I would have, and now it feels like so hard. So it's always kind of, I more regret not learning than learn something. Actually, I think that's always this kind of way around of education in a way.
It's funny, you know, because I mean, maybe that leads actually to my next step in my career, because when I returned to Germany and I finished my studies, I had at that point decided that I want to do 3D animation. But before I do that, I wanted to learn a little bit more. And that's, again, this kind of same thing that for me personally worked well. I wanted to see if I can have like a master's, like a MFA, that I could do specifically in 3D animation. And that's was something that I felt like, just with the work experience I gained at, you know, my internship, but then also with what I had done at the university, like on my own time, I just didn't feel 100% prepared. And that's where you say, you know, you just sometimes like, oh, I wished I had really learned that. And for me, it was like, before I really, really go into this career, I would need to feel like I learned a bit more about this in depth, and not just me on the side. And one of the things I did is I actually did my what is it, like a thesis, which was my animation like I did like a, you know, for the final thesis for my final graduation at the university in Germany. I did a little animated film, but I also wrote some things for it. And I did that together with ProSiebenSat.1 in Berlin, which was cool. It was just for like, basically 4 or 5 months and working with them. And I learned a lot of things. I actually switched to Lightwave at that point in time. So very interesting. I definitely switched around a lot with software. And then they actually also offered me a job, but I was already in conversations with, I'm not sure if people are aware, know this scholarship, but it was called the Fulbright Scholarship. And they offered basically support for studying in the US specifically. And that's why I actually applied for that, because, as you know, in Germany, the education is generally free. And so it wasn't really something where, at that point in time, there was any sort of loan I could have gotten, or any, I needed some support. And so I applied for that scholarship. And it actually turned out, which was awesome. I got to go to New York and study at the School of Visual Arts in the computer art program that was called for 2 years, which was awesome. And at that point in time, I really learned a lot about, certain things, how it's done, because a lot of the people that taught, they came from Blue Sky Studios, who were further up north from Manhattan, and that was really awesome. And then they, gave a lot of their experience in those classes. And so I also got a little bit of a connection to the industry there, but I also made great friends in that time. And that's where, I think it really, really kind of started for me. It's like, okay, now I feel prepared. And the one thing though, I actually had to return to Germany after that, those 2 years of study, because that scholarship I got, the requirement was that you return to your home country for 3 years, or 2 years. I'm not sure anymore. But basically I went back, and I started then in Germany at a smaller studio, Spanz & Partner, and that was about in 2006, I would say. And that was really cool. I started as I think as a TD, and I did pretty much a lot of different things that you do as a TD in a small company. There were I think we were 14, 15 or so, not a large group. And it was cool because they did commercials for, all kinds of different areas, like the Kinder Surprise, for example, which was cool. So Ferrero was one of the clients. Jägermeister, the really cool 3D animated characters was their specialty. And it was cool. And in that case, I actually worked on Softimage XSI. So that was again a different one. And I actually had used this during my studies at the School of Visual Arts as well, because for several reasons, I wanted to do some switches there. And that was really interesting. So again, a different software, and but I really enjoyed working at that team. It was so such a close knit team. And I'm still in touch with several people from that time, and it was a great first real job to start in.
That's also the typical time frame, is in a way, because there were not as much off-the-shelf software that were very clearly established as today. Today is like Maya, Houdini, very clearly. But at that time, I mean, Softimage doesn't exist anymore, for example. It was actually the 1 year where I wanted to start it, because I get fed up with Maya, was actually the year that they kind of vanished out of existence. And that's something what I really see when talking to a lot of people, is this determination of going into this industry in a very conscious way. So that's also when we just looked what your career was so far, it was very determined. I mean, just the whole thing of applying in a different country, it's I don't know how you felt at that time, but if I imagine myself at that time, I'm probably I was kind of blindly just trying to do something, and then just would do something like this, but it would be still felt very crazy to go outside of Germany, even completely different continent. So I really see in a lot of people that also come to the show, this determination and then kind of extreme focus on getting there. Everyone's way will be a little bit different, but it is crazy how people kind of push forward and do the leap of faith, kind of, in a way, because I mean that was not the normal road, even for there is this cliche of Germans doing the things, you know, like step by step by step. And in a way, I know where this is coming from. I have that too. For example, education, you want the basics, but this is kind of like jumping out of this whole thing, doing a complete like 180 in some cases, and then coming back when you decided what exactly is what you want. And I think that's super amazing kind of to do that. And I think it's important to go in such like unestablished environments, for example.
Yes, it's also interesting because at that time, you know, like it wasn't so connected, you know, in the sense that, for example, there was no Skype that I knew of at that point in time. I remember
ICQ probably or something like that.
I used NetMeeting. I made a really, really choppy video, like, you know, that's how pretty much this worked.
That was the level of the internet, huh?
Yeah. It was very, very different and very interesting. And also, you know, I mean, they already had GPS and all of those things, but I do remember that in LA, I remember I rented this car. I had a big stack of maps, and then that's how I drove around, you know. It was definitely still, you know, wasn't like, oh, my cell phone, I just put it in and I'm gonna go and it's gonna all work good. So yeah, it was definitely a little different, but it was also, you know, a big adventure in a lot of sense. I always think about how people must have felt when, you know, they were really, like, as you said, came with the boat over, and then literally it must have been so different and such a huge adventure. If it already felt for me a big adventure, even though of course that's not even in the slightest comparable. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. And but you know, it was always, even when I was then in Germany, I definitely felt like, okay, I do want to work for feature animation, and I want to work on a big film. And so after 3 years working in Hamburg at Spans & Partner, I was like, okay, I saw an opening on the website for Blue Sky Studios, and so I reached out to one of my friends, actually my best friends from the School of Visual Arts where I studied. He actually had just started at Blue Sky before that, and you know, I asked him, hey, you know, how is it? You know, what do you think? And so he, you know, I applied, and he sent my reel to the rigging supervisor at that point. And it just happened that I had a bird on my demo reel. So there was this was actually a really cool commercial. It was like a bird made of coins, and it basically becomes, you know, it flies, and then at some point it falls apart and all the coins fall down. And this was a cool thing. I loved this commercial, and I put it on my demo reel because I had rigged the bird and all of the stuff, and it had just happened at this point that they were working on Rio, their first Rio movie. They were very interested in birds. Coins or whatever. That was really funny. So I was, you know, they called me, they made an interview, and I'm telling you, you know, I was nervous for this first interview with my internship in LA, but oh my God, was I nervous for the Blue Sky Studios and call. I was so nervous because I wanted it so bad. That I was like, don't screw it up, don't screw it up. And I hate phone calls when you don't see the other person. I really don't like it very much. Still to this day, if I can avoid making phone calls without like video, I'm just not, you know, not doing it. And but it must have gone well because they invited me for in-person interview, which is funny, right? That these days you wouldn't really like, I guess you would just do it via Skype or Zoom or whatever. But they flew me over, and I had an in-person interview with them, and they asked me all about the bird, which was funny. And then I told them too, you know, I have been working with Softimage XSI for the last couple of like 4 years. Are you okay with this? Because I know you use Maya, right? And they're like, yeah, we don't care. And I'm like, okay. So I was a little nervous about it, but they really didn't care. And so they hired me, which was cool. And then I started at Blue Sky Studios in 2009. Yes. So, and that's, I guess, was a long pre-Blue Sky Studios talk, but that's basically where I started as a rigging TD, character technical director, it was called at that point in time, and in the rigging department. And that was for the my first movie, Rio 1.
Welcome to our short mid-episode coffee break. If you love the content and would like to have a successful career in the film or games industry yourself, check out my website 21artistshow.com. There you can find helpful articles, masterclasses, and coaching opportunities that help dozens of my students to bring their profession to the next level. That's all. Check out 21artistshow.com and share the podcast with cool people you know. Let's continue with the episode. What I think is always fascinating is when I talked with Paul, he was one of the first, so basically in the first episode, he is technical director from Pixar. I'm not sure if you know him, Paul Kaniak. And he worked like on Ratatouille and so on. And that was something very similar between you two. And I think it's probably similar to a lot of people on these positions, is like he actually got his like Pixar debut and his job at Pixar because he was researching car painting shaders basically. And like imagine which Pixar project was the one that he was actually hired. It was Cars. So, and that's the same thing. And I remember you told this story before, and this kind of also stuck with me, is kind of like, okay, you can be as skillful as you want. You can be the best in whatever you are doing. At the end of the day, it's only the need that will actually get you hired, especially on this high level position, because there are always better people than you are, but maybe not in exactly the thing that they are currently focused on, basically. And that was actually for you the same reason, you know, the feather thing and the bird thing was the reason, because Rio. It's
just this little bit of the right timing, and you know, that's kind of luck, you know, because I didn't know that Blue Sky was working on that film, right? That they were getting that done. Who knows, right? It's a secret normally. So that was really luck.
And how is it like luck defined? Is like creating opportunities. It's basically, you know, you throw things at the wall and one of them, and then you call it luck. It's always the same thing.
Yes.
You will not get lucky just by like sitting in your couch like all day. It's always like throwing things around, and then luck is always a factor. But I feel like luck is basically something that comes with like getting yourself out there, creating skills or creating something, and then it will not be instantaneously, you know, you create something and then suddenly like the jobs or the opportunities or come. No, it's like create something, nothing, create something, nothing. And then maybe the 100th time, maybe the 1000th time, it will be exactly the stars are aligned, and then you basically get into. Moving over, you probably didn't know how long it will be also, because I don't know, like maybe it's a year, maybe less, maybe more. And yeah, so how was the start basically?
That was very interesting, because yes, I had done it before, but the one that I did before the move was it was a limited amount of time. That was very clear. It was 7 months at that point, so I knew that I would go back. For this move, you know, I didn't know. I mean, I definitely saw this as one of the big job opportunities in my career, and I had it wasn't a limited or project-based time that was specified for me. So I was kind of seeing this more of like a longer-term employment. So what I did is, though still, you know, I primarily, you know, sold a lot of stuff. I think I sold pretty much all of my furniture, or gave it away, you know, that kind of stuff, or donated some stuff. And then I, you know, some things, of course, that I wanted to keep, you know, my poor parents had to keep in the basement.
That's what we all do. My parents also have all this stuff in their basements. It's like it's the parents' duty. The moment the bird is flying away from the nest, is like, keep my stuff, please. You never know when I need this book or this whatever.
Exactly. And it was interesting. I had definitely learned some things because, at this point it was actually in some ways lucky because I didn't have huge amounts of furniture or larger items that I had to ship with a container over. So, and that was not what I had intended. So literally I came with 2 fully packed suitcases. And the plan was also that, my dad would fly over with 2 fully packed suitcases at some point. So we kind of brought stuff over in some ways there. And then some things my parents kind of shipped over, like just via regular mail, the things that were a little bit less important, so that they didn't break. But I had it done for a couple of times. And then of course, when I studied in New York, I also was a little bit more familiar how all of this works for, like, that was a 2-year program. So, I kind of had it a little bit more down at that point. So that worked relatively well. I had already actually flew over a little earlier to organize myself a housing situation. I actually, did appointments from Germany. I think there was all kinds. I looked at Craigslist and other areas, and, had appointments with them. So I met with people while I was out there for like a week, and I found a great place with a roommate. She was awesome. And so I had already a place to go, which was great. And then when I flew over and then that was the interesting thing, is because my visa, I believe, arrived 2 days before my flyout date. That was nerve-wracking. So difficult one, but it made it. I made it. So I was on the plane, flew over, and I'm always somebody that's just trying to be very efficient, sometimes to my detriment. And so what I did is I literally flew in from the airport. I drove to IKEA. I bought the furniture, which I had already kind of picked beforehand. I took that. That was with a rental car that I had also picked up. And then I also went to a media market, bought a GPS so that it would be easier for me. So, and then I drove with all of this to my new apartment. And then I started actually building my furniture in my bed until the very late nights. So my first day at Blue Sky, because I had, the IKEA tools really that are manual, I had blisters all over my hands. And I started at Blue Sky Studios. And it was pretty, and I think everybody can really relate to that first day, where you start in a feature film studio that has done all of those cool movies, and you're just like in awe of everything. So yeah, it was really, really awesome. The cool thing was also a couple of people had started there just a month earlier or around the same time. So it was definitely also a group of people that had just already gone through some of those learning experiences, which was kind of nice. So we started helping each other, which was really, really awesome. And everybody was super nice. And of course, I was also definitely in awe because, there are people that knew so much. And at the beginning, I was definitely like, oh my God, I have to work so hard. And I haven't even done the, Maya for so long. So I was like, it wasn't that I was intimidated about working so hard. It was more like, I hope I can do it. And so I worked extra hard to to make sure I would be very, very fast, proficient, quickly proficient in the Maya environment and figure it out. And yeah, that was the starting time. It was pretty awesome. And I mentioned this before, but at Blue Sky, as character TD in the rigging department, you did both. You did the more technical setup stuff of, joints. And of course, they had their own auto rigging system that you had to kind of learn and understand. And then you also needed to, know how to do the correctives for the characters and just get proficient with the way they were doing things. And a lot of it was not, something new to me. I hadn't done this kind of setup. In a small studio, you don't, have a, in commercial, you don't have time to sculpt all of those custom shapes for characters. You just have to crank something out extremely fast that works well, but works for the short amount of time the commercial is on screen, right? And not for a 90-minute movie.
You just started at Blue Sky. It was your first project, your first time, and it was Rio. And so how can you imagine working for that? Because before you worked in small companies, you worked in research, you did studies, so you had expectations of what the typical day would look like, what typical expectation from you will be, how rigging looks like. So what was it actually at the end of the day when you started at Blue Sky? How was it the work actually, or how was it different to before, for example?
Well, the main difference was that I primarily now was focused 100% on rigging. At the previous company, I was primarily working on, everything that was a little bit more technical that came up. That could have been sometimes making render layers. Sometimes it was helping out with, getting some sort of motion fluids out. I had to do some real flow, a lot of that, which I actually enjoyed. And it was really something that was very, a little bit more varied from the work I was, but not as in-depth, like at the Blue Sky rigging department, that's what you do. You do rig, and at this specifically actually characters. It's interesting too, I should maybe mention that I have not always had, that specific direction that I wanted to become a rigging TD. I actually started out thinking I wanted to do effects. I actually thought I'm going to do, water simulation, crowd simulation, all of that. But that definitely changed at my first job in Germany, because characters just became something I just so enjoyed. And the rigging that I learned there was just something that made sense to me, and that's why I decided that for my job at Blue Sky Studios, rigging was the thing I wanted to go for, because I finally found that this is what I loved. And one of the big reasons was also, with water simulation, it takes,
Ages.
time. You do it, you wait. You do it, you wait. And that's very different with a character setup. You just do it and you get the feedback pretty much instantly. And that was something I very much responded to and wanted to continue. And that's why at Blue Sky, that was really cool for me, because I had found what I wanted to do and I could 100% focus on it. So that was very different. And I think that was the main difference. The other difference was that I had not done too much modeling in my previous job. And that changed completely at Blue Sky Studios as well. So I was doing a lot of blend shapes. I was doing a lot of adjustments, sometimes from topology. Sometimes, it's body corrective. Sometimes it's facial expressions. So there was a lot of modeling involved, which was not something I had done much before. And I was also a little worried about it. But somehow that was something I actually really, really enjoyed. So it was quite a nice fit. But the interesting thing was with Rio. So I actually didn't work on birds on the first film.
What?
I had.
Why is that? How is that possible? Does it make sense? They hire you specifically for because of that skill, and then they say, you know what? We put our best girl on the sideline, And then let's see how she evolves before we use her.
Well, let's maybe first say the best girl is maybe not the right one, because I mean I had rigged a coin bird, right?
Okay.
But I mean, people in the department, there were some that were extremely good, and they had built the wing rig, and they were doing the main characters. And when I came, I had to learn the system, and I basically started on BG characters, humanoid BG characters. But then and that was lucky, because, normally when you start on your first production, it's not that you're given right away a bigger character. And I was really fortunate to get one of the, at least from a human standpoint, one of the larger characters, which was the bad guy of they're like smugglers in this movie, and there's this lead smuggler named Marcel, and I got to rig him, and that was fantastic, because that character was I have a little bit something, I love working on villains, because they make, normally, they have more expressions. Yes, it's much more extreme, and that is fun to me. I love that. And it also paid off. I've worked with an amazing animator on this. She was the lead on it, and I loved working with her. She's great. Jackie was just an awesome animator to have on my first bigger character and collaborate with her. And that also was a little bit of a difference. I would say that in my old studio, we were just like those little tiny 14, 15 people. And the animators I worked with, they were basically my buddies. They were sitting next to me. We were doing stuff together. It was very fluid. In a large company like Blue Sky Studios, that was different. We wouldn't even sit together. They were sitting on the other side of the building. I mean, the company at that point, I think, was about maybe 400 people. Later, it got more. But it wasn't the same thing, because, you would primarily work in your team and rigging, but you had to, of course, collaborate with the animators. And I would say that when I started, that relationship wasn't the best. It was definitely something, there was a little bit of tension. And I think, I would say if you have worked in rigging or in animation, right, that relationship between animators and riggers, can be tense sometimes, because animation wants something specific. An animator wants the tool that they want, and sometimes they make an enormous amount of requests. Some of them very valid, and some of them may be more on the wish list side of things. And the rigger, it really depends what they want to do. They sometimes, are like, yeah, I'll do everything, but it's also a time issue, right? You can't do that. So it's like, it depends how you take it. It can be like, oh, totally unreasonable, this thing that doesn't make any sense, or there's definitely can be tension between those two the departments. And I would say that was something new to me. I had not experienced this before, and of course, it's much easier when you're in a small studio that you sit next to the person. It's hard to have this kind of tension with somebody that is next to you. I'm not saying it's impossible. It can definitely happen, but it's a different it's harder, because you just have to deal with it. And in some ways, you also want to, it's also a bit of an attitude, you want to make it work. And at Blue Sky, it was definitely a bit more tense. And of course, a couple of things were also because the requests had to be much more standardized. You can't just do whatever you want, right? That can be difficult if you have to support that for 100 animators on a film when they're in production. So it has to be more standardized. But I would say that at the beginning, I was definitely surprised on some of the resistances or some of the difficulties, the tensions that were there on both sides. And I actually think that has shaped me a little bit from a standpoint of how I dealt with that, and actually where my path led me to as well, because I think later on that would become one of my main roles in being in between those two departments, and later on even more departments than that.
I think it's super important that you mentioned that, because sometimes it's kind of get glossed over about this kind of topics, but they are actually something that influences a lot, because I always see that from the pipeline perspective. So from my perspective, I mostly talk to leads and supervisor a lot of times, but they are mostly the one that kind of have this kind of regime clashes in their departments, and so for me, I was also the first time I saw that, I was like, where's this coming from? It doesn't really make sense, because these are one of the departments that have to work perfectly together, and they rely on each other in a way, like a rig that doesn't look good animated, an animation where the rig is shit doesn't work as well. So it's kind of it feels contradictory in a way. But if you look a little bit at the departments and how completely different their mindset are, you understand why this is coming from. Like this is something which I notice is like, that's one of the things, by the way, I always try to lift up the animation department to a little bit more of a technical level. Because I feel like if you lift them up a little bit, besides solving their own problems, it always creates this like understanding level, and then they were like, oh, I understand, if I have this small request, which I suddenly today 5 seconds after I get my new rig decided, it will mean a whole day of work for one of them. And I think that's one of the things, and I'm pretty sure something in that regard, you're probably also going in the direction. But it's interesting, because this is typical rivalry I always see in basically every company, is definitely between rigging and animation, more than most other departments, to be honest.
Yeah, it is. It's something that can be made better. As you said, I think a lot of it has to do with understanding what the other side is thinking, and how what it means for them in a lot of ways. Sometimes it means that, hey, when an animator wants to have, and I'm going real basic, a foot roll in a rig, right? That is definitely something is like, absolutely. I mean, how are you going to do walks and all of that, right? You need that. When, and then when, though there are other requests that are like, hey, I want, for example, all of my, channels to be retargeted to something totally different for preference reason, for example, that could happen. Then, as a rigger, you're like, okay, that's so much effort, because it's actually in the system that we use. So we would have to change it on all of them. It would affect everything. And this small request becomes something big. So sometimes it's about understanding a little bit and maybe having that conversation. And also sometimes it's about just, as you said, educating people a little bit more and speaking that language. Actually, it was really cool. Later on in my other role I was having, I was always kind of explaining a little bit how things work and why they would have a different effect when we had a note that would come in. And there was a point where actually the supervisors I was working with and a couple of the leads were like, can you, hey, give us a little rigging, like, little basic class? And I said, I would be more than happy to do that. So I made little rigging sessions, and it was really, really fun. And I think it helped with the understanding. And of course, in that sense, it was also nice because it came from animation. They want to understand it, and to get it to that point definitely was also a little bit of a work to get there, but it paid off nice. And it actually was something I continued by having cross-discipline education within, and later on I would work with what we call the characters department, where we had all of the I call it 5 disciplines that play into it together, and we would do cross-education and try to make sure that everybody knew what they were talking about, because it's not, while between animation and rigging, it's especially prominent, that conflict. I would say it is not exclusive to those two departments. It can be between others as well. And that's why I felt like, as you said, understanding what goes into the other discipline makes a huge difference.
I actually had this discussion with Andrew Schlössl, who is the development of education in Framestore. And we also talked about how important it is that not in this case, you were maybe your personal view and you try to kind of create an environment, but how important it is for the company itself to do that education, not just to keep up, but to align people much more in the same level. I mean, for example, one of the things that I always recommend if you want to learn scripting, especially on a higher level, is code reviews. I think that's the easiest way to align yourself with someone else, because someone tells you exactly what's his opinion or even maybe solutions would be. So you kind of level up, but you also level up on terms of quality. You learn from them, they learn from you. So it's this kind of, at the end of the day, it ends up with communication and stuff like that. But I think that's super important, and it actually is one of the more important things the bigger the company has, because a lot of people think, if I work at Pixar, suddenly all this fights and stuff like that. Because I noticed it's more in smaller companies, to be honest. I had more this weird emotional stuff, where people have their ego and you have to pet their ego and stuff like that. I had this more in smaller companies, I felt like.
Oh, really?
Bigger was actually, for me, always the opposite. I always felt like when I was working at Weta or Framestore, it was the professionalism was so strong and people were so kind of safe in their skills that they didn't need people to say that they do a good job, or that every criticism is suddenly a reflection of your personality or something like that. So I felt that was more in smaller companies. But sometimes people forget that when you go in this higher mid to big companies, you have other problems suddenly. You have problems of detachment to other people. It's always easier to shit on another company that works with you on the same project, because that's basically what I always had. Every time you work with another company on the same project, they are shit and we are good. And the same thing happens if your departments are so big. You're basically you only get the results. You don't know why the result is happening. Maybe it's time constrained. Maybe the team is too small. Maybe whatever. And then you can only say the result is not great. I would do a better job, so they're bad. And I think that's something you have to be keeping in the back of your mind when you do that. It will be just different challenges, and you have to find new solutions basically to that. Sometimes it's nicer, whatever you value. I value more professionalism. I don't like this petty discussions and whatever. I would rather fight the fight of acceptance from each department than fight the fight of yes, you do a good job. Fine. So, but I think it's still important to understand that even when you go into a big company and you fall back onto be a smaller part, you still have an enormous impact on how people treat each other. It's this kind of small thing that you described, and also do explaining things, for example. I love that. If I can explain to someone and hopefully he will learn a little bit from that, maybe he will kind of understand me better or even solve it himself, which for himself is always also kind of I did it last time I asked, but this time I couldn't do myself. That's cool. Kind of. So there's a lot of things I feel unfold in there.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's very interesting too, because at some point we were rigging definitely felt like we want to move closer to animation. So physically, even in the studio, so that there is more of that, we can go back and forth. We can actually visit each other more. It was encouraged. And that was something I think also helped, although we since animation is a huge department, or was a huge department at Blue Sky Studios, it was definitely something that wasn't so easily done. And a lot of departments wanted to be close to animation. But I think you can already see that there has been a thinking about that, getting people closer to each other, making sure that they understand each other and communicate with each other.
I think the easiest way is to go the Google route, is just marry all the riggers to the animators, and then basically there is a daily, either getting much worse or much better. One of these two roads will be ending up. So what happened next, basically? So Rio was not the project for you, that like the big one that where you were like fully involved on the main characters, which we were actually kind of, or at least I was kind of like expecting after the whole hiring process. So what came next, basically? what was the next project for you?
Well, the next project was actually Ice Age. That was Continental Drift. I think it's the fourth one. And we had actually, that was also extremely cool because I worked on a new female lead character, which was She-Ra, the female tiger. And that was pretty amazing. So I got my first big lead character. And it was interesting because it was again with the animation lead that I extremely liked working with. So we had a really good relationship with figuring this out together, because it was a difficult character from a sense of that she had to be found. You know, she was new. She needed to have the personality that we wanted. So it took a while to really find that and get that going. And I remember we both had a presentation with the directors, and I was really successful. So we definitely had just a great collaboration going with that. So that was a really interesting character. I actually have to admit that she was not a villain, and she was not as expressive in her personality, which is why I actually have to admit I even enjoyed my first character on Rio basically a little more, just because it's more challenging, you know. Not that she was challenged. She had other challenges. You had to make her extremely appealing, and she was a quadruped, you know, so always a little bit more difficult. But from, I would say, personality standpoint, I definitely just like a little bit more expressiveness, broad. That is definitely something I enjoy more, but you sometimes get more in villains or in some crazy characters. And that basically is what I got on Epic, which was the next film I worked on. And that was the Caterpillar. And I'm not sure, that was maybe a movie not everybody's familiar with, but this Caterpillar was quite a difficult character to work on. He had 6 arms and 4 legs. And he had basically, at the end, how I solved it, it was kind of 2 spines, kind of spine setups. So you could have him basically walk more flat, you know, on the ground, which we actually didn't really do much of it at the end. But, and he could also kind of bend up. That was normal, like an L shape, you know, the legs on the ground, and then the arms would be more like up. And that was, I would say, where I really got into it. Because on that one, our auto rigging system, you know, I had to get in there, and I had to write some, what we call modules to make that work, use some existing components for arms, making sure that we can have 6 of those. I had to write some, you know, ways of mirroring certain things over from like fingers to the other finger and so on. And those kind of things we didn't have, or the spine setup was where it was different. The way you know, some of the switching there happened. It was very, very different in some ways. And that was great, because that was the first time I really got into writing more code in a way that it made it into our auto rigging system and making those adjustments. And that was great. And that's maybe also a little bit from my point of view, you know, you had at Blue Sky, you had 2, well, maybe kind of 3 kind of different riggers. You had the extremely, extremely technical ones that were sometimes not even like doing so much character work, but we're also doing character work, but they were really, really talented in that area of scripting and programming and making very complicated setups for the rest of the team. Then you had other riggers that were more completely on the more creative side. They would be excellent at sculpting, making things, deformations appealing. They worked a lot on characters, and they could still do, of course, custom things, but they're not really programming. And then you had the in-between, which was basically who did kind of both. And that was something that I fell into. So I love to do the deformation, the creative thing, but I also did the more technical aspects of it. And on Epic, I could really start doing this on a larger scale, which was then what really brought me on Rio 2 to be considered, and then in the end was promoted to a lead on this show. And I was the actual facial lead on the show. We had 2 leads at that point in time. It was a body lead, a facial lead, and on the Rio one, we also had a bird lead. And the bird lead was an amazing rigger who on that show, actually, he left. So after a while being the face lead, I also took over some of the responsibilities of the bird lead. And that where it became really interesting for me, because it was the first time, I was stepping out of the just purely rigging for myself on a character. It was leading the team for the faces primarily, and then for the helping out with the bird setups, which was complicated, but luckily, it was already kind of established in a good way. And then on the same time, I also, because we switched our rigging system from, basically on Epic, we switched our rigging system that we had used on Rio 1. And that meant that Rio 2, we made the decision to also re-rig all the assets and use our new system. So, we didn't have much savings, but I would say we still had savings because we knew the art direction. And that was sometimes maybe that's the most time-consuming thing. So we knew how those rigs were being used, how they were, how they should look, what kind of shapes we needed to do. And we could even inherit some of the shapes and then build on those to make them even better for our second iteration. So we decided to re-rig all of the rigs. And that was an interesting time. So I also, at the same time, while I was a lead, I also re-rigged Blue and Jewel, which was definitely a lot of work, but because it was a little simpler, I could do that at the same time. And the lead responsibility, that was definitely something very new that I was super excited to take on, but it was also, of course, with everything new also comes a little bit of the concern, oh, can I do it? A little bit of that worry, of course, is always there at the beginning.
Before we move on to the lead part, it would be interesting for me because I actually have a lot of people talking with me who coming from rigging. It's actually like most of my clients actually are riggers. It's so absurd because I have no clue of rigging besides the basic stuff. But there's always this question is like, how important is scripting in itself? How important is, and a little bit also in the same direction is like how far, like what kind of level is like a necessity, or basically kind of like if you want, for example, work on something like Blue Sky project, Rio project, which is like the level that would be expected. Can you give us a little bit like of an insight in that one?
Yes, and I think that actually also varies a little bit from studio to studio, company to company. At Blue Sky, at least when I started, scripting was definitely something that was extremely beneficial. I think in general, scripting can be beneficial to I would say, it doesn't have to be a requirement. I know riggers that don't script and they are doing fantastic work. However, then you do have to have some sort of setup that you can use some, you have to use, let's say, the Maya elements in a smart way. There's not so much of an automation maybe that you could script that will help make that easier. So every single time, I was doing something that needed to be more automated, or a task that I had to repeat multiple times, you kind of want to, or I at least make my life easier when I write a script. I think generally it can be very beneficial for yourself. It also depends. In some companies, it might be a requirement. At Blue Sky, it was definitely beneficial. I also think you had more ability to then maybe become a lead. It was all a little bit more on the technical side there, but that was also because the rigging department initially at Blue Sky supported themselves with a lot of their tools. Not all of them, but a lot of their tools. That changed later in the process, and the idea was that we would have TDs, a separate department that would take care of that more. And some of the rigging TDs that were in the rigging department, we also had some shift over and go into the TD department because they were more really on the deep end technical side. For me, I would say, as I said, I'm in between, but I'm not I'm not a software developer. And that is also not something I was interested in. As I early learned at IBM, I did not think that was...
That's how we make the curves, basically,
Yeah, exactly. So for me, it was primarily scripting, making scripts, writing components that would make it into the auto rig, but it wasn't going all the way into... the really, we had an R&D team, they were making amazing things that were way over my head. But I would say it is all, in my opinion, it's always beneficial if you know a little bit of scripting, just because it also makes your life easier. But what I've seen at companies, even at Pixar, I think they are separating those things. So you are much, you can be, if that's how you choose to do it, you're the modeler and the rigger. So you're much more on the more, let's say deformation side of things, the creative side of things. I don't want to say, because I feel like programming is inherently creative as well, just not in the same way, but extremely creative. It can be. That's why I want to avoid doing that, saying that. But I do think, let's say, at Pixar, you're more on the deformation side of things. If you choose to do so, you don't have to, and you can be, it's just a little different job description. And I think at other studios, you really don't have to script. I have, where I work now at Mikros Animation, there are also different levels of that. Some riggers are extremely versatile in it, and some are not. For me personally, I always think it can't hurt, because honestly, at some point in your life, you'll make your life easier if you can write a little automation script that saves you a lot of time.
Well, that's basically also the rollback to the education part. It's like you can maybe regret not learning scripting, but I cannot imagine you regret learning scripting. At least that's the thing. And I would say I absolutely get your answer, and I feel like it's a little bit specific, because at the end of the day, most people don't end up at Pixar or Blue Sky, and they don't have a dedicated department for that. And what I always say is if you are a great rigger, you can make stuff happening, but only if you are also a scripter, you can make a production happening. Because at the end of the day is if you are a great rigger, but then you have to repeat things 100 times, exporting and stuff like that, or very specific rigging things, you cannot keep up in a production that has a high iteration rate, for example. And especially if there probably will not be a specific department that will kind of code everything for you. So I think even if your goal is to become like DreamWorks, Pixar, or Disney, where you probably will not specifically need that skill, I think just to get there and to get like the value throughout the steps that you need go, and to become like very valuable through like the companies that will hire in between, I think scripting is one of the strongest points, especially for rigging. I don't even see that as much, for example, for lighting or something like that. I see specifically for rigging, but because it is so technically and it's also so like iterational, because animators like, oh no, let's change this one. Now I have to do the whole thing. So I absolutely get your point. I think it's exactly the reflection of the how bigger companies is. But until you're there, I feel like scripting is actually a great stepping stone to give you the small edge. Like you got the edge with the bird and the feather. I think scripting can be sometimes the edge is like, oh, this guy is great rigger, but he can also do like small scripts and stuff like that. And I think that's something, and that's what I basically always say is like, do how far you want, but it definitely will only benefit you to have a minimum amount of this knowledge, for example.
Yes, and I also think it really depends. For example, if you really hate scripting, let's say you really hate programming, right? And you don't want to do it, but you do like rigging, then you could. And if your goal maybe is to work with one of the it doesn't have to be necessarily Pixar or Blue Sky doesn't exist anymore.
That will be hard nowadays.
Yes, very hard. But it could even be other smaller companies that are still relatively large, but those, if you want to, for example, not script, then I think you can always also go the modeling route. Modeling and rigging can also well pair. And that can be very valid as well. So you could say, I'm more on the creative side, I do models and I rig. And that can be really, really cool, because then, you could be maybe even hired as a modeler, or some companies now are also having the facial shapes, for example, created more on a modeler's plate, but that modeler has to be more technical, because that modeler also has to maybe do some skinning and all of that stuff and use rigging tools. So that could be also another avenue of going that way. I haven't met too many riggers that really, really despise scripting to the degree that they wouldn't want to write even like a little helper script. But I have met people that really love the formation aspect of it and really like modeling, and that pairs well, in my opinion.
I think that's interesting, because when I was going through the journey and was thinking about like how much do I want to go the rigging route and stuff like that, I always thought that animation is actually the connection, like rigging and animation, because they're like, but which one would you say are in terms of career connection is better, rigging and modeling or rigging and animation?
Well, that's hard to say. I think it's also so up to the person and what they like. I think it's really important that what you choose is what you're really passionate about. For me, I really, early on, I realized I'm just not a really good animator. If you are a really good animator, rigging can pair well, but I would say to stay or to become and stay a really good animator, you have to animate. Animate. It's super beneficial if you can maybe do your own rigs and if you know how to do it. But I think that combination can be, as I said, extremely beneficial. It depends where you want to do it. If you want to like go to and work on feature film, 3D animated feature film, then you probably will do nothing else than animate, I assume, because it's also highly competitive. It takes, I think, constant practice. And I think rigging is such a vast other area that combining that can be hard. I have seen it being done, but it can be hard. For me, as I said, I was not a super great animator. And I think, I'm not sure, even with practice, if I could have ever been a super great animator.
Probably.
But for me, the modeling aspect works in the sense because you also work a little bit more. One is shot production and the other is more of an asset field. So that's also, I think, a little bit of a separation there. Not that they are separate, but it's two areas, I would say. And then this asset production, the modeling and the rigging pairs well, because you can't really make a rig without a model, and you can't have a beautiful working rig without having some sort of modeling skills. However, you do need a really good rig for animation, so that can help you in your process. But I think and also as a rigger, it can help you if you know what an animator needs. But you can learn both of those things without being a specialist and pair those things.
Yeah, I think you did mention a good point, the separation between assets and shots. I think there is this line, and I mean, just time-wise, like a shots will start later, for example. So I think there is this separation, and I totally agree. I feel like modeling and rigging is actually the easier pair, and like the more sellable pair. You as where this is like where you're a little bit of a jump, I feel like. And as you said, it's a very high performance skill. A good animator, you don't have to be as good as a modeler in this case, for example, as a rigger. Let's go back to actually what happened next. So you were on Rio 2 and you switched now to a lead position. So how much does it change? Because we actually had this discussion before with Nicolas Leblanc about like what is lead, what a supervisor does. And it's kind of like still a misconception exactly like how the switch actually looks like. And especially for the person who does the switch, it's a lot of times of like growing pains of, I shouldn't maybe touch as much. So how was it for you, and what was actually like your task when you switched to that one?
Well, as a lead, I'd say you still do a lot of hands-on work. I rigged Blue and Jewel, re-rigged Blue and Jewel on the side as well. So that was still a lot of the work I did. So it's not that as a lead, I think you still get your hands really in there. The big difference for me was that you do sometimes have to delegate certain tasks. That's definitely important because there are things so you have to learn that a little bit. So it gets a little less hands-on, but primarily, you have to just also learn that some things maybe are not wise to take on yourself. And then you have more meetings, always, yeah.
Everyone who becomes in this direction is like, they despise the meeting, at least in the beginning.
Yes. Yes, I agree. There's like sometimes not necessary evil. But that is definitely something that increases. And I think it's a lot about, and this is interesting because the way I always understood being a lead is that your team comes first. And that is not, I would say, and I really want to maybe actually say this in this interview, because I think that is, for me, the number one importance that changes. When you are doing your character on your own, and getting this character done is kind of the number one. And that's kind of the only thing you have to focus on. But when you're a lead, the way I always saw my job is my team comes first. So while I might rig Jewel on the side and I have a deadline, I always prioritize that my team wouldn't get stopped first. That was always more, for me, a higher priority. So, for example, as a lead, I set up the facial, like guidelines, templates, how you do things from a creative standpoint, technical standpoint, providing and distributing those to the team. So I also wrote like those attributes that would be in there, the different channels that would be available, how they would be named. I would work close with animation and that. And the importance was that I didn't want to be the bottleneck because in some ways, I fed the team with this information. And it was really important for me that while I might have to push my date out, I tried not to, right? But it was always more important to help the team first so that they would not be stopped and stuck, because that's much more impactful than having me basically delay something than if like 15 people can't work. And that was always one of the things. I always wanted to take care of them first and that's how I saw my responsibility. And that, I think, is a big difference. And I would say, in my experience, I think every good lead sees it that way.
I totally agree. I think that's something that most people need to learn. Some people come already with this like mindset, which is perfect, because then you already kind of perfect to go into this lead position or supervising position. But some people are like, it is just it can be crashing a little bit if you go from senior to lead, because it feels like the natural like progress, but it actually is already kind of a shift, because until senior you just basically get more complicated stuff and more exciting stuff, maybe even like the bigger explosions, the bigger rigs, and the main character. But after senior, it becomes actually, it shifts a little bit into a different direction, and I feel some people kind of are a little bit surprised and blindsided from this, because they were expecting it's like just going like continue this path, but it actually shifts more to a management, to a kind of like, now I have to care for people. It's not just like the biggest work and that's about, no, it's more like that's what I meant, is not that you specifically, especially not on the lead, you're not specifically go away from hands-on, but you do more of this kind of taking out fires, basically hands-on. You're more like, okay, what is needed, as you mentioned, to keep the machine running, to keep my department running, so they're not like wait or spin their wheels. And I think that's a little bit where also ego becomes a little bit of a pushback, because suddenly it's like sometimes you're lucky, you get the interesting character, but sometimes it's not, because it's not on your priority as much as it was on as a senior role.
Yes, it's very interesting, because as you said, the lead might be the natural next career step, but it is a different, I would say, a different job. It's a different career direction. It goes a little bit as an angle. And it's interesting, because also, and that's also one thing I would like to mention about that. When I became lead, I was still one of the younger people from age, but also from the people that had started just a couple of years ago at Blue Sky. So I wasn't one of those people that had been for a long time at the company, had a wealth of knowledge and experience, were also much older in the sense of age difference. And I was worried, I was really, really worried that as a lead, people would accept me and I would be able to do that lead duty in that sense, that people would respect me and do that. And one thing is, if you do your lead role right, and I'm saying right in the sense that you put your team first, but also second, that you are not, you don't pretend you know everything. Honestly, nobody knows everything. Not just because you became lead, you suddenly know everything, or you're basically have to
pretend
like, I'm the one that now makes the decisions, or I'm the one that make the calls, right? That's a really wrong attitude. I think you have to acknowledge and that you can't be the expert at everything. In my team, there were some amazing people and they just knew this better. And the art is, as a lead, that you then say, either if you have to, you're the expert in this, can you explain this to me so I understand this better when I speak with the other, the supervisor, or speak with somebody else? Or you say, you're the right person for this. This is now your task. You're passionate about it. Just making sure that you find the right people that are doing that are just really good at this. And that's a little bit of the art, because I think if you're going to a lead position, it's like, now I made it, now I'm the one that makes the calls. That is not really a little bit of a disaster time. And I think also, in that sense, then if you understand your lead role correctly, then the age difference and also for example, if you have to lead more experienced people, it doesn't matter anymore. That has been my experience. Even though I was worried about it, I would say it worked well, and I hope that people agreed with me that they liked working with me in that role, I hope. And I think that that makes a huge difference. And I would say that it's not only lead, that is in any role, supervisor, head, whatever we're going to be later, acknowledging this, and also knowing for yourself that it's not your role to know everything. That's just not your role. Your role is more to know who is the best at knowing that, and then making sure that you give this work to that person.
That's actually what I always noticed also the moment I worked with more professional people, where I feel like, okay, this are like a lead, supervisor, producer, sometimes even, when they admitted that they don't know it. And I felt like this make a huge impact on my professionalism, because I noticed this like this. Yeah. It's much easier for me nowadays. I like, for example, on teaching, I noticed that there's a lot of questions I don't know. Like, I've never thought about this specific thing here. And I'm so okay with saying like, I don't know it yet. So a lot of times I'm like, someone asked me, what will happen if I do that? I was like, don't know. I have to find out. Let me come back to you later. Or sometimes like find it out and tell me, kind of like, depends on where I'm going. But this is actually coming from the good leads and supervisor I had, where I respected this grown-up professional behavior, where I feel like, okay, they're not trying to impress me. Like, for what reason? They're much better than I am. So what is here to impress? Or they don't want to hide their shortcomings or something. No, they're kind of like feel enough self-esteem and confidence that they can say like, it's not my job to know everything. That is not what I'm here. It's actually not even my role to know everything. And I'm totally fine when I don't know. But of course, and that's important, it has to be addressed, because I also had leads and supervisor who didn't know, or like, well, obviously the team didn't know about something, and it was kind of like put under the rug. And then it was like, I still don't know, and he still don't know, and we still didn't solve this problem. So I feel like this combination of both, because again, there are people who say that they don't know, but they don't do anything about it. It's basically like a defense mechanism is like, I don't know about it, it's fine, I don't know that. And then 1 week later, like you ask them, okay, now can we do that? I still don't know. It's like, how is that possible?
Yeah, it shouldn't be used as an excuse. It should only be as like, acknowledgement when, you have to, you can't just go in and say, now because I have that role, I know everything. This is just basically that acknowledgement. But yes, of course, if there are things that are unclear, it's also on you to facilitate the finding of the solutions, and also making sure that you know yourself either, or as I said, you are bringing maybe the person into a meeting and have that person present certain things. I've done this as too, because one of the other things also and I think everyone does that, hopefully, giving those people also the credit and making sure that they are basically being, it's not everywhere, but it's really important. I actually make a point of mentioning the names of people. And if I do something at some point accidentally, which can happen, that's not, nobody thinks of everything all the time, then I definitely want to make a point later of it, of course, that is never something I don't want to do. It's always important to give also the people the credit. And it's also important the other way around, when you have, for example, a supervisor that let's say you are a supervisor, and maybe somebody that's higher than you is like really pushing on something and says we should do this and this and this, but they are not really the expert. And I have done this before, that I said, I don't agree with you on this. I would do this, this, and this for those reasons. I think this is the better path. And just having that confidence also to, even though you maybe get that, and that might sometimes be also just out of the need to just making the decision because I need to know everything, and then just you telling that person that, hey, I have a lot of experience in this. This is the reasons why I think this and this might work better. Of course, that might still be that person's decision to take that advice, but having that confidence in the other position to also tell your lead or your supervisor that. And hopefully if you have a good lead and supervisor, they will take that into account and say, let me look at that. Maybe I didn't see all of this. I want to make sure, that I see all of that. You have more experience in this area. So let me see, maybe this is the right way to do it. And I think that's important too. So it's a little bit always on both sides, right? You have to make sure that you tell your leader, your supervisor that might make, they're all just humans, right? So everybody's going to make some sort of mistake or not think about something. So I think having this relationship and also encouraging it as a lead that, and as a supervisor to make sure that people are feeling like they can tell you that. That's
totally.
important too.
That's one of the things that sometimes people are not aware of. Like, not everyone has the same priorities all the time. This is the biggest downfall in humankind kind of thing, is like you always think everyone thinks the same things as you do, and they have the same priorities as you do. So if you, for example, working on this rig, you think the supervisor is like sitting at night and thinking also about this specific rig, and then you're wondering why is no one moving this specific part there. And so this is like the problem that everyone has to, like, depends on which the side you are, supervisor, lead, or the other side of the artist TD, is like you have to be aware a lot of times it's just not on their priority. Doesn't mean it doesn't have a priority. It's just a lot of times means you have to find out, is it a priority, like in objective sense, not in your personal sense, but like because you're working on it, but on like a little bit more of a production sense, department sense. And then if you feel it, maybe you check with another artist or TD or something, then bring it to them and don't feel like, it's like, oh, they ignore it or whatever. A lot of times they just have other things to do, that they're much more explosive or whatever, and they just miss this part. And I think if you do it in a educated way, in a little bit of prepared way, I think they will be very grateful. At least I know I will, if someone comes to me and says, hey, Alex, I saw that this button explodes the whole export and stuff like that, and we use that for a week and stuff like that. I was like, ooh, well, okay, let me check it in that, especially if they do their homework. I love it if someone comes to me, even if I did a mistake, and they are, oh, I tested it, I know what it is, like, kind of, so and I'm like, oh, thanks, I will look into that. I think that is one part, and the other part is the whole, like, being open with your mistakes is not just about like having a cool character and he's like, oh yeah, I'm fine with telling you what is wrong with whatever. No, it's also about creating, as you basically said, this kind of a trusting relationship. Because how can you, it's just this thing of Buddha or Jesus, if you have Jesus in front of you, like you cannot, first thing, you cannot connect with Jesus. That's something I actually, like, you cannot connect with perfect. How can you connect with someone who is perfect, or Buddha or whatever? Like someone who is totally Zen, has no flaws, has everything is perfect, everything is happy, whatever. You cannot connect to a person that is literally perfect. If it's the same thing you do with this people that you only know from TV. If Tom Cruise suddenly came to you, or Eddie Murphy or something like that, until they show you their human side, whatever that means, you have a problem to connect to them, and you feel like aligned to them. And telling someone your flaws in a way, or you don't know something, I think always bridges a little bit, and it allows you to be flawful yourself. It allows you to not hide, like, because that happens a lot of times, I can tell you, is like, oh, people do mistakes. Let's see if it's someone notices, basically. And a lot of times it notices like weeks and months later, in a way of like, everything is broken, we have to republish everything again. Yeah, absolutely. It's all about allowing that you can fail and say that certain things failed, without feeling like you have to hide it, or you have to make sure that you and I think the best way to do this is by going by example and saying, I've said this multiple times, like,
I'm sorry. I actually, this maybe was that was probably the wrong decision that didn't work out. Let's try something else. Let's focus on this and let's try that. Sorry, guys, that did not work. I made the decision, so that didn't work out. So let's try something else that might work. What do you guys think that works better? And then we can move on to it. And I think there's no problem in this ever. I feel like I think it becomes a problem if nobody wants to say anything about anything that goes wrong, and then or if you do a lot of finger pointing starts. That's the worst, and that is something that has to be also. And again, as a lead or supervisor, you have to make sure that this is not acceptable, because and that it normally, I mean. It can definitely happen, but making sure that the way you react, that this is not something that is, that you discourage that.
Yeah, it's actually, because we talked previously with Carl Rosendale about company culture. It's a little bit of a company culture thing where you create, like you said, by example, you create a culture of yourself. Is it okay to make a mistake? How do you handle that? How do you see responsibility, which is super important? Do you feel responsible for the things that surrounds you, or only responsible for the thing that was actually told you that's your thing? And so I feel like it's always this company culture. And for example, Carl mentioned that PDI, by the way, they created Shrek. So PDI was the one that was later bought by DreamWorks, and they created Shrek. They actually were firing people if they didn't fit the culture, because in a way, it sounds not much harsher than it was probably, but they were like, okay, this person just kind of brings toxicity in the whole thing. Maybe pointing fingers, maybe doing things, maybe hiding things, or something like that. So basically, where they were like very self-conscious about, like, you can try and you lead by example, but you have to be careful, because it is at the end of the day a little bit of a balance. You have to, you cannot just say I give example and everything will work out. A lot of times they're people just fight you, and then you doesn't work. So I think it's a very complex thing, but I think that's important to understand when you switch from a technical or artistic role to a lead or supervising role, is that it is a different path. It is more of a production management path, and you have to relearn maybe some things if you didn't already catch it throughout your career.
Yes, and it is interesting, because I think that's where a lot of what I initially had as part of my studies, the project management aspect of it, came a little bit more into it. And I think that is something that, especially in the last couple of years, I have definitely been more on the management side. But it becomes a decision at some point what you want to do, if you want to be more on the artist side. And I have met many people that I would have liked to have as supervisors that did not want to do supervisor work. And I have met others that really were made for it, but and did really good as well. And they stuck with it, but they had to also make that decision, right? If they want to do that. Because for me personally, and then maybe that brings us a little bit to the next kind of work I was doing. So on the Peanuts movie, that was for me a little bit of a big turning point, because as a lead, I think you still work on, have a lot of hands-on work. And on the Peanuts movie, I actually became the show lead. That was a new position that was introduced at that point in time, and I helped create that as well with the supervisor at that point. And it was basically a show lead for rigging that would oversee all of the aspects. So we would still have a face lead and a body lead, but you had one that span across that, because it, especially with the Peanuts movie, it was actually quite a challenging film, because, and I'm not sure if, whoever hasn't seen it, taking a look would really help to understand why, but because it had, the Peanuts characters, they're so iconic. They have been established. The stories have been established. It's a huge thing. We wanted to be faithful to that look. And we wanted to make sure that we could do this in 3D while being faithful to the original 2D cartoon. And that was a huge challenge. And the main challenge is because and then saying this for maybe saying it is probably a good thing, because I still sometimes I'm being asked this. No, if it looks simpler, it doesn't mean it's simpler in 3D, and especially in rigging. If something looks simple, often it's much, much, much harder. And those cartoon characters, Snoopy, Woodstock, and Charlie Brown and all those kids, they were very, very challenging because we wanted to keep some of this 2D and the hand-drawn feeling of it in 3D. And one thing 3D is not so great with, and especially in the past and at this point, when I worked on it, when was this? It must have been 2014 or so, I think. And that, 2013, 14. And that was, computers are great at doing something very accurate, but when you have that hand-drawn feeling, that's just never accurate, because it's just not how we do things, right? Our circles will never be 100% mathematically correct unless you have a really, really steady hand, but that is very rare. So if you want to get that, we had to do new things to make the computer basically forget that accuracy and have tools that would allow us that. And that translation was a big, big deal. And we had to completely, in some ways, forget our pipeline and do something completely new for rigging. And it was huge. And the collaboration with animation, the collaboration with it went all the way into materials, into making the costumes, how we deal with that, how we deal with the sim aspects of it, how do we do the fur. All of this became such a tight collaboration. And that was, I would say, my big turning point, because I worked so close with animation. I think we had never worked so close with animation, because it had to be the flexibility we needed for those rigs was also so extremely important. And I worked with them so much on figuring out how we even animated. They had to figure out their style, and it was on twos at the end, what we decided to do. And it was a huge collaborative effort. I think everybody felt it, because everybody had also one common goal, and that was to be faithful to this property, this established 2D cartoon, and to its creator. And that was really, really interesting. And I'm still mentioning it as the one film I most enjoyed working on, because it was absolutely challenging. It was stressful. And it's one of those nostalgic things where I look back and it was all wonderful and great. But I know there were tens times there.
That's it with this week's episode of the 21 Artist Show. Thank you so much for watching and listening. This podcast is 100% ad-free, and to keep it that way, check out my website 21artistshow.com. There you can find exclusive access to awesome masterclasses and coaching opportunities to work successfully in visual effects, animation, and games. Just go to 21artistshow.com. And don't forget to share it with people who would benefit from that content, and tell them they're awesome. See you on the next episode. Next on the 21 Artist Show.
You went to the studio and you picked up your things, and you ran into some other people. Of course, everything with masks, right? It had to be all very tightly organized. You only certain number of people could be in the studio. You had to, of course, keep your distances, disinfect, and it was all difficult. It wasn't where you could just all get together and hug, right? This wasn't possible. Also, another thing that made it really hard in that sense. But yeah, so it was definitely when I went to the studio and saw the studio for the last time, ran into a couple of people, and that was definitely a bit of a harder. The time where it really sank in, like this is it.